Hey, what's going on guys, Khraze here, back into Ghost of Tsushima, and today let's take a look at some really awesome gear combos that will completely change the way you play this game. Some of them are pretty straightforward. They will simply buff up your damage or your capabilities in one way or another, to the point that you might even clear up the entire game with them, while others might provide some additional functionalities and cool exploits that you can use against the enemies to take them down in very unique ways. In this video I want to cover a few of them that I've used with a ton of success, so if you enjoyed this video, a thumbs up on it would be super awesome, and let's jump right into it. Let's begin with the black powder bomb. Now by default, even if you fully upgrade this, it can't always take down all of the enemies at the same time. At most, it's probably going to knock down a few, which makes them ready for an instant finishing blow. But there is actually something that you can do to fully enable that and more, and that is by also adding the charm of incineration and the charm of enduring affliction in the mix. The first one is a reward from one of Lady Masako's tales, while the second one is a reward from one of the side tales called A Debt Repaid in Act 2. But these work very well together, and even more so, fully enhance the black powder capabilities. And that is by, of course, first the charm of incineration makes it so that the bomb now also sets enemies on fire, and not just that, it also helps spread that fire to additional targets. Meanwhile, the second one, the enduring affliction, makes that fire to not just last for longer, but also deal 50% more damage. So this is the perfect combination if you take down entire groups of enemies. As you can see, if there is even one target that will survive, they just die from the burning damage, and even if they don't, they will help spread it out to other enemies that might be around the camp. So definitely go ahead, play with it. You can even use something like a firecracker to attract all of the enemies in the camp, and then just throw one big explosion to take all of them down in one single blast. This brings us to the second ghost weapon on the list that can also be fully enhanced to also take down entire groups of enemies, and that is the most unobvious kunai. By default, use this on 1, 2 or maximum 3 targets, which makes it so that you can break off their guards, and this exposes them to a ton of damage that you can do freely. But there are a couple of charm combinations that can enable that, so that you can throw 5 of these at 5 targets and also deal a ton more damage, to the point that you can even one-shot some of the enemies. This is of course by combining the charms of Hidden Blades and the charm of Advantage. Charm of Hidden Blade is something that you get by reaching the legend tier called the Demon's Blade towards the end of the game, and this adds 2 additional kunais that you can throw on top of the ones that you already have, up to a maximum of 5. The charms of Advantage is something that you can get from one of Kenji's side tales, as well as from another side mission called the Cost of Iron, and both of these together provide additional 40% ghost weapon damage, which yes, works for the kunais as well. And yeah, the damage is quite spectacular. It doesn't always take down all of the enemies that have armor on them, though it does take a few of them. The bigger ones with the shields might take a couple of blows, but especially the ones in the first 2 maps, they almost always die in one shot if you align them properly and manage to hit all of the 5 kunais. Furthermore, you can also turn this into an infinite kunai build by also combining this charm right here, the charm of Ryujin. I hope that I pronounced that correctly. You get this by visiting the Hazy Cliff Shrine on this side of the map, and it basically makes it so that when doing perfect dodges, you will also get an additional kunai from the enemies. Now this brings me to another very interesting mechanic that I really love about Ghost of Tsushima, which is that terrify mechanic that makes enemies run off the battlefield once they see you pull off a certain ability, kill an enemy in a certain way, or using certain types of items. And of course there are ways to actually make this even better, that makes it so that more enemies will flee the battlefield, to the point that you can make entire groups of enemies to just run away in fear. And that is by combining 2 really awesome types of charms. The first one is the charm of Ikazuchi, a major one that you can get from the Crane Mountain Shrine, and this makes it so that your perks and abilities that have a terrify component are also 25% more likely to occur. So stuff like your mythical abilities that you use to kill enemies with, or for example doing a perfect parry, or any of the other components on gear and abilities that might have a terrify component, is going to get buffed by this. But we are also going to fully upgrade that by also using the charms of Fortune 1 and 2. I've covered these 2 in one of yesterday's videos, so definitely go ahead and check it out. In that video I've covered a ton of other charms that are also some of the best in the game, but these 2 make it so that all percentage chances from abilities and gear happen even more likely, like 100% more likely to occur, which yes, also affects that terrify mechanic. So for example, when I'm poisoning an enemy, which by the way it's one of the best ways to scare the enemies, it's going to cause at least 2 if not 3, sometimes even 4 to run around and get terrified and basically desert their party mates. But this also works with anything else, like when you're parrying somebody, you're going to see that even 2 or 3 enemies might fall on their feet and you can just take them down in one single blow. And it also works with like setting enemies on fire, that's also an effect that helps with that, and a ton of others that will definitely help you out, terrify enemies, and makes group fighting so much easier just because of this item combination. It also helps if you wear some gear that might further augment that, like for example the ghost armor provides additional terror when you kill enemies, but this is probably like the best combination you can find. This also brings us to another way to exploit the enemy's weaknesses, and this time around it's by exploiting their forces against one another, and what better way to do that than using the hallucination darts, which you get from one of Yuriko's side tales that you get later in the game. But these can be quite powerful by default. I mean, they provide some nice distraction. You can use this on a couple of enemies, they will start fighting with their other party mates, and this can cause a little bit of damage to them and sometimes even kill like a few targets. But there is a way to fully enable that and make it so that most of these hallucinating enemies might even one-shot all of the other enemies around them, and that is by of course using 2 charms of the lost mind. The first one you can get it from one of Masako's quest lines, while the second one is something that you get by freeing Sago Mill in Act 3 on this side of the map. But if you use both of these, they will provide together a 100% bonus damage to hallucinating enemies when they deal damage against other enemies, and the results are just insane. For example, a pikeman is really good at taking down enemies in just like one shot with these 2 right here. You can also use these on ranged enemies and make them shoot from afar, especially if they're up on towers, so that they are really hard to reach. But you can also use it on a tanky enemy and they are going to die really hard, but they also have one-shot capabilities, even against enemies that might wear a ton of armor on them. Again, this time around is not a distraction anymore, but an entire way to take down entire camps and not move a muscle. Let's move over to number 5, which is actually a really awesome ability to knock down enemies from their feet in one single attack, and this also opens them up for instant assassinations, to the point that I actually made an entire build around this, but until I fully perfect this, I'm just going to mention some of the charm combinations and then maybe talk about it in a later video once I fully nail it down. But this is the charm of Susanoo. It's something that you get from the Stone Dragon Shrine in Region 1 pretty early on in the game, and it makes it that staggered enemies have a 30% chance to also be knocked down. Basically, completely open them up with a full-on square assassination that almost always means an instant killing blow. But again, we can use this with those really awesome charms of fortune to turn that from 30% into 60%, which obviously speaks volumes when it comes to big groups of enemies that you can just knock down and have more chances to knock them off their feet than not, which also makes it really easy to assassinate them in full open combat. That's why I really love combining this with Gosaku's armor that makes it super easy to break down enemies' guards, especially since with the proper stance you can do so in no more than 3 attacks. So definitely something you should go ahead and try out. Again, I'm going to follow up with a build really soon that's going to make that even more OP than this. This brings us to the final charm combination on the list, which actually was really helpful to me, especially in that ghost playthrough, but you can make the smoke bomb to heal more than half of your HP, or well, up to half of your HP depending on the items that you're using. But this is of course by using the charm of Unseen Respite and the charm of Divine Healing to basically heal half of your current HP, which is massive. You're not even using Resolve to do that, you're just using that smoke bomb to do it. But the charm of Unseen Respite, you get it from freeing this village right here in the most southern part of the island. You can do so, I believe, in Act 2 once you start seeing them on the map. Meanwhile, the charm of Divine Healing, especially number 2, you get it from the Burden of Death side quest that you get later on in the game. Not really sure if there's also a number 3 that might provide more than just like that 25% healing that you might get, but it's still quite useful. If there was one, you would probably get even more heals, but even like this, you're you're getting about 40% heal back just from this combination of items. So again, very good to have. It's very useful in combat to not just heal yourself when you're low HP, but also open enemies up for chain assassinations in the middle of the combat, which again is going to make things so much easier for you. But this is it with the charm combinations. If you have any more that might be insane or really cool to look at, definitely go ahead and post them down below. I'm really curious to see what other people came up with, as there's a ton of combinations you can pull off anyway. But this is it for now. There's going to be more incoming soon, especially a couple of builds that are really strong, and one of them is also really immortal, but this is going to get posted I think tomorrow. In the meantime, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and activate that notification bell, and I'll see you guys in the next one.